Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And it's a Friday morning. It's June 27th. Here we are moving into the last weekend of June. Wow. It's amazing. And pretty soon, as I said the other day, we'll be seeing, all kinds of Halloween products in the store, if they're not already in there, back to school items, and we're not even at 4th of July. We are close to 4th of July, though, of course, being next week. And this actually is going to be, I think, a big vacation weekend and a big vacation week. And so what we thought we would do, because of that, we thought we would skip the news for today because people are about getting ready for their holidays and whatnot. And we wanted to dive in more deeply to something that is super important. This is a book that came out, I'd say it came out about 2 months ago. And it's so important in light of what's going on, especially with this whole now transgender agenda, which is off the charts, even though, thanks be to God, we had a Supreme Court decision last week that was a very important one that upheld the ban on mutilating surgeries for minors in that state. And really, they're saying, the experts are saying, this is setting precedent because it's one, I think, of now 24 states that has similar laws, and it continues, and it's super important. But in this brilliant book by Dr. Nathanael Blake, it's really important the way he lays everything out in terms of getting into the background, especially taking a look at how sexual liberation hurts us all. That's actually the subtitle of the book. Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Again, it came out earlier this year, maybe about 2.5 months ago. It shows from within, and this is what's so important, the damage that the sexual revolution has caused to our bodies, our souls, and our sense of joy. Now, what's really important is he quotes extensively, not just from the research, and we can look at, just 2 years ago, where the former Surgeon General came out with a report about the epidemic of loneliness. Now, if we are so free and have so many choices and can supposedly do whatever we want with our bodies, why are we so miserable and why are we so lonely? So does this idea of this over-sexualized culture doing whatever to myself, whatever to my body, taking advantage of your body, doing whatever we want sexually, does it really result in happiness? The answer is no. And there's all kinds of secular evidence to back this up. So quoting extensively, in addition to the research, from testimonies and reports written by the revolution, the sexual revolution's most outspoken advocates, Dr. Nathanael Blake proves that even beyond the question of right and wrong, the Christian sexual ethics simply provide a better way to love and to live. This is what Father Mitch and I were talking about last week. If you recall, in our Cultural Connection segment, we were talking about the fact that God doesn't work against himself. He designed us, male and female, in his image and likeness. So that's why it doesn't work when we try to mess around with how our bodies are designed. And the same thing goes for our sexuality. There is a place for that in a marriage between a man and a woman for procreation, and it's not something that can just be treated very lightly or treated as a toy or something only for our own personal gain. And this book dives into this, and it's so important because you have testimonies, you have stories from real people in addition to the research. And so a quick summary on the book. The sexual revolution offered happiness and supposedly great sex, but Americans are increasingly lonely and unhappy. And they even report having less and less satisfying relationships, including sexual relationships, rather than providing fulfilling pleasure. The sexual liberation movement has created a relational wasteland in which men and women are alienated from one another. The promised liberation has made people slaves to desire and has led to pain, among other things. So this is a very important book for our times. And I think if you're smart enough and, of course, humble enough to admit that, my way was not the greatest thing, maybe I need to try it the Lord's way, that's when you can really open yourself up to beauty and happiness and true joy. So I want to encourage you, before we roll the interview, the first part of this, Victims of the Revolution, with our guest, Dr. Nathanael Blake, to look this book up. And it's on the religious catalog, by the way. You can also get it from Ignatius Press. But take a look at it and purchase it, especially if you're a parent or you work with young people. So here's the first part of our interview with Dr. Nathanael Blake on a Friday. Always such an important topic, but especially this time of year when we are just inundated with messages and advertisements and news stories and documentaries and so much pushback from what our church teaches about our beautiful faith and what God gives us in the gift of our human sexuality and how we are made in his image and likeness, male and female. Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. And we have the author with us, and we're grateful to be joined by Dr. Gosh, I'm so excited to talk about this book, Doc, because there's so many things that I want to discuss with you, especially as we talk about this month of so-called Pride Month. Our guest is Dr. Nathanael Blake, who's the author of this book. Let's talk about, first of all, let's talk about why you wrote the book and what led you to put this all down for people. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. So I wrote the book because I think that there is a bit of a cultural shift where people are seeing that the promises of the sexual revolution, the promises of authenticity and flourishing and happiness have not materialized. Those promises have been broken. That even as our culture pursues sexual pleasure and liberation ever more ardently, it's not making people happy. It's not leading people to lives that are full of flourishing and fulfillment. And so I think there's an opening for Christians to respond and say, look, we're not killjoys. We're not bigots. Instead, we are holding out a possibility of a better way for life because it is rooted in God's creation order and how we are meant to live, how we are meant, most of us called to the vocations of marriage and family, to come together as male and female in a committed relationship, and that is actually the best way to live and to flourish in this life.
What's so just mind-boggling, though, there's so much information readily available to show how jumping from bed to bed, experimenting, thinking you can change your sex, and everything under the sun related to sex, it doesn't make you happy. And yet, why is it, do you think, that they haven't, so many in our culture haven't gotten that message or refuse to accept it?
Well, I think it's because it holds out that promise of short-term pleasure, and it's hard to resist. These are, the sexual drive is powerful for most people, and it is hard to step back and say, even if you've got the data, to step back and say, well, I will actually be happier and have probably a better sex life in a committed relationship that is built on love and mutual self-giving, rather than trying for drunken hookups or, submerging yourself in online pornography or whatever else it is. But those they seem easier. They're tempting because they say you can have the pleasure and you can have it quickly when you want it without the virtue, without the reliance on grace. But again, they end up ultimately, they're empty calories. They're the junk food of the relational and sexual world.
Absolutely. Talking with Nathanael Blake, a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a regular columnist for The Federalist and other popular publications, receiving his doctorate from the Catholic University of America, living in Virginia with his wife and children. And his book, which I would really recommend, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All, recently published by our friends at Ignatius Press. So I don't know about you, but when I was writing my book, another book I wrote was also published by Ignatius about 12 years ago. I was writing it from a women's perspective. I'm a revert to the faith, and I had so many friends, including myself, who bought into the lie of the so-called sexual revolution, and we suffered for it. And so we put our testimonies together, and I did a lot of research on abortion and contraception and how women were treated in the media, over-sexualized. There was so much information, though, Nathanael, that I had to leave out. And this was, again, a while ago. This book came out, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. Did you find yourself saying, I just can't put everything in here? There's so much that shows that people are not happy.
Yes. I mean, I could have dived into the social sciences, and people like Jennifer Morse have done great work going into more detail on social science studies, on things, all these different things, how divorce hurts kids, how committed relationships are better for us, and so on. So there is just a multitude of information, and I tried to pick some of the best anecdotes, some of the best information I could. And I did try to rely on sources like the New York Times and the Atlantic that are going to be believed by people who are still
Right.
committed to the culture of sexual liberation.
What's been the response? I know the book came out in April. What's been the response so far?
It's been very positive. I don't think I've gotten the attention of all the people who would be critical yet, but I'm getting a very positive response from Christian readers, and I do want to reach that Christian audience because I think there are many people who are in positions who are dealing with this on the front lines, right? If I could pick one audience for the book, it would be every campus minister, Protestant or Catholic in the country, because they're the ones who are on the very front lines dealing with people who are confused. They've been taught lies about sexuality, and they're also the ones who are having to deal with the people who are hurt by this, the victims, the young women who are told over and over again to participate in hedonism and hookups and are finding out that it's leaving them miserable and empty and alone. The young men who are just sucked into online pornography and find that they can't quit it, and so on. But I think really just deacons and campus ministers and Bible study leaders and all these Christians who are in position to help others, that's who I'm writing this for, to equip them, to encourage them, and to show them that, yeah, we have a better way of life. Christianity is directed towards our good, both in this world and the next world.
We're talking with the author of a powerful new book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. The author is Nathanael Blake, and the book is published by Ignatius Press. You'll also find it at the EWTN Religious Catalog. So here we are, Dr. Blake. We are in so-called Pride Month, and we'll pick this up at the other side. We only have about 2 minutes left, but I'm sure that this is a time where most people are like, okay, here we go again. They may have someone in their family who is same-sex attracted, or they may be surrounded by people at work or promoting Pride Month. When we come back, I'd like to maybe get your advice, and I asked the same of Archbishop Corleone this morning, who's from the Archdiocese, obviously, of San Francisco, which is ground zero for a lot of what you deal with in the book in terms of the sexual revolution and liberation that's still occurring there all the time with various events and efforts. Maybe some advice for people on how we lovingly witness, because we want people to come back into the church or come into the church and understand that God's plan is always the best plan, but it can be so sensitive in terms of how to approach that. So we'll just go ahead and take the break because I know this is a pretty big question about how do we handle this. So we'll just remind folks to whom we're speaking. Nathanael Blake is the author of a beautiful, powerful new book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. It was recently released in late April by our friends at Ignatius Press, and it shows from within the damage that the sexual revolution has caused to our bodies, our souls, and our sense of joy, quoting extensively from testimonies, which is so important because you can't argue with someone's story, okay? Testimonies along with reports written by the revolution's most outspoken advocates. Nathanael Blake proves that even beyond the question of right and wrong, Christian sexual ethics simply provide a better way, not just to love, but to live. So again, jot this book down, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Hope you're having a beautiful day. It is a Tuesday, and you are listening to Catholic Connection, which is, of course, a production of EWTN. Just a reminder, we offer the Holy Sacrifice of the Beautiful Mass from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel live every morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, so please don't miss out. We can send a link for you regarding the Mass every day, and you just go to EWTN.com and click on subscribe. Speaking of EWTN, it's great to have the one, the only Dr. Matthew Bunson with us, of course, one of our own, and we're so excited because his new book, Pope Leo XIV, is literally flying off the shelves, a portrait of the first American Pope, and he had, I understand, a book signing last night in D.C. Good morning, my friend. How goes the battle? How are things?
Good morning. It's great to be with you. Although it's hard to top the time we were able to spend together in Rome. It's a slightly different setting for both of us.
Yeah, it's always great to get together, especially when we both have our spouses there and we can chat.
Exactly.
And it's really, really nice. Now, you and I are planning a pilgrimage next year, so we'll have more on that soon. We are doing In the Footprints of the Pope, so we're excited about that. We'll be going to Orvieto and Arezzo and Castel Gandolfo and Roma and other places, including Viterbo, tied to the popes. But speaking of popes, your new book, Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. So when did you decide that you were going to actually do this book? I mean, obviously, Pope Francis is passing away. You go into the conclave, and then we have a new pope. How quickly did this all come about?
Well, really, in my case, the day after his election, we realized, certainly at the EWTN Books, that this is a project that needed to happen. There was intense interest in Leo XIV, and let's just say, as I've joked, perhaps even here once before, that it is very rare that you're able to say that something is unprecedented in the history of the Church. Well, this is unprecedented. We not only see the first member of the Order of St. Augustine, but he's also obviously the first American, the first U.S.-born pope. So the level of interest is intense. We're seeing that. And so we realized that we really wanted to provide a service to our listeners, to our readers, to everyone who might be interested in learning more about him, which is why we call it a portrait. And from that standpoint, it seemed unquestionable that a book like this had to happen.
And in terms of putting it together, how difficult was it? I mean, once the name was out there, of course, everyone is Googling and searching, even though when we were along the Via della Conciliazione, I'm sure that happened to you when you were on set. Nobody could get on the internet. We were trying to find out who he was and, where he was from. I'll never forget that. Dominic and I were both like, we have to check this out very quickly. But in terms of the portrait, what do you give us versus, let's say, a big biography? What's the difference between a portrait, would you say, and a full biography?
Well, first, a book that we're able to put out quickly is not going to make the claim of being the all-encompassing, final, definitive biography of somebody. That would be setting unrealistic and, to be honest, ridiculous expectations. It is, however, it's authoritative in the sense that it's comprehensive. So what we want to do with the portrait is to provide his life, his biography. And growing up in Chicago, all of the influences that shaped him in particular, his life as an Augustinian. He's been a member of that Augustinian community, that tradition, for 55 years of his 69 years. And then his times of service, in particular in Peru and then in Rome. What were the attributes that he possesses that led the members of the College of Cardinals, and the vast, vast majority of them, clearly in the conclave, to elect him after only 4 ballots. And then, based on what we at that point know about him and what he has done in those first days of his pontificate, where we think he might be taking the Church. So it's really a portrait in the sense that it's a service. It is giving us an understanding of who he is. And I'm happy to say that since the book was launched on May the 22nd, he has really reinforced many of the things that he initially said and many of the conclusions that were drawn in the book about where we think he's taking us.
I'm curious what your thoughts are now looking back, because how many of us, and we were on each other's shows leading into the conclave after the death of Pope Francis, and yet all the experts with whom we both spoke, including wonderful people like Bishop Barron, who's so well versed in our faith and so knowledgeable, and a bishop, obviously, an American possibility wasn't on the radar. And yet, after the conclave, after the announcement, Dolan was very open in saying, he's the perfect person because of A, B, C, D. And I think so, too, because of his very diverse background. I think he really is going to be a great bridge and is already doing that. But why don't you think he was on the radar for anybody?
Well,
at least out there in the culture.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the way to think about it is that there has always been an assumption that an American could never get elected, certainly not in our lifetime. And the reasons for that are, I think there are 2 big ones. The most obvious is that there would be a presumed or assumed reluctance to elect a cardinal from the most powerful country in the world. That there simply wouldn't be an appetite among the members of the College of Cardinals to vote for him, that the optics of it, so to speak, would be all wrong. And Bishop Barron, when we interviewed him, made the observation that going back to the late, great Francis Cardinal George of Chicago, that he said perhaps the election of an American pope would signal sort of the decline of America as a superpower, that it was no longer perceived that way. Well, I don't think anyone would say that America is no longer a superpower. So I think what we're seeing is that for the members of the College of Cardinals, they realized that this was the perfect candidate. And one of the reasons that they did goes to the second reason that it was assumed that Americans would not be elected, is because we are certainly, relative to the rest of the church, still a very young church. It's only in 1908 or so that the United States church, the diocese in the U.S., were lifted from missionary status. In other words, we were sort of set off on our own because we were considered old enough. Mm-hmm. So the perception always was that American cardinals, while men of great talent, gifts, and influence, represented a younger church. Well, clearly, in Robert Francis Prevost, Cardinal Prevost, they saw somebody of such deep spiritual and ecclesiastical maturity that it overcame any of their objections. And one way that has been put to me is that he was considered, quote, the least American you could possibly find from among the members of the college. He'd been gone from the U.S. for a very, very long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think also the fact that he is an American, but had spent so much time outside of the country, but had such a beautiful background in so many different areas. He understood America, but understood other cultures and other peoples. That made him really the perfect candidate in so many ways.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He was, I think it was Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the Archbishop Emeritus of Galveston, Houston, who described him as more of a universal figure than as an American. There were some cardinals, in fact, who weren't really sure he was an American in that sense, because their dealings with him had been entirely in Spanish, for example. There were some who noted his perfect Italian, which it is, his obviously beyond fluent Spanish. So he was difficult to pin down in terms of his actual nationality. There are certain things that set aside Americans, and we don't have to get into those, but he simply didn't seem to have a lot of those characteristics. And if you combine that with the set of talents that the members of the college were clearly looking for, he was able to tick all of those boxes, except the one that seemed to be this insurmountable obstacle of being, quote, an American. And at the end of the day, it just didn't matter very much.
Yeah. What I think is really beautiful is his own heritage. It's so diverse, and it really just, I think, bodes of the necessary need for that type of a background. With a little bit, obviously he was born in America, but he has Haitian, he has Italian, he has African American, he has all these different, wonderful nationalities in his own, background, his own family background, which again makes him, I think, very, very approachable and very real for so many people around the world in the Universal Church. More with Dr. Matthew Bunson, continuing our conversation on his beautiful new book, Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. We'll be right back. Hope you're having a beautiful Tuesday morning, this June 10th, 2025, on the one, the only EWTN, Global Catholic Radio Network. Always great to catch up with my friend, Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, veteran Catholic journalist and church historian, talking about his brand new book, hot off the presses, really just recently, very, very recent, has it been released, and so we're very excited about this. And the book is entitled Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. Okay, Matthew, during the first segment, you were mentioning the fact that our Pope is giving us some indications, even this early on, as to where, so what is he, about a month, just over a month into his pontificate, as to where he's taking the church. What kind of signs are you seeing? What are some of the telltale signs in terms of what you're thinking when you made that statement earlier?
Yeah, well, there's the first are the visual cues, and that's connected, I think, to a certain return to formalism and the use of symbols to convey the importance of the office, I note, but not of himself in the sense of just a couple of days ago, he was giving a presentation, I think it was at the Angelicum, and he apologized, he said, for being late. Now, I find it fascinating that here we have a pope who's apologizing for being late to an audience, but then he said, please forgive me, I know I was a little late, just try to remember I've only been on the job for a month.
Aw.
And it's the type of, it's not sort of false humility, it's a kind of delightful, sort of self-deprecating humor that, yeah, this is an enormous job that he's taken on. But he's also, at the very same time, those symbols that we saw from when he came out in the loggia, the beautiful, the red mozzetta that he wears, the popes traditionally wear, but also the certain return to formal customs. We're seeing, for example, that if you pay close attention and look at the photos of his audiences, for example, with cardinals and bishops and officials, they're all back in cassock. There was this tendency under Pope Francis, because that was his style. It was not a criticism of Francis, but the style was for like the sort of suit that they would wear, suit and collar for prelates and for priests. Now it's a return to traditions of what they technically call the soutane. So it's the black cassock with the cape called the pellegrina, and all you have the different linings and trimmings and everything else. And then there's also the custom that when cardinals and bishops come into his presence, they lift the zucchetto as a sign of respect, the little skull cap that they wear.
Right.
It's a little thing, but it speaks volumes about how seriously Pope Leo takes the office. And it's a kind of restoration of that tradition, but I think it is sending very clear messages across the Roman Curia, for example, that, yes, I want a little bit more formality than we've had over the 12 years because that's my style. And I'm connecting myself very deliberately with all of my predecessors. So it's not like he's rejecting Francis. It's not like he's eschewing Francis. Francis is mentioned all the time in his homilies. But he's also connecting himself with Benedict XVI. Quoted him just the other day on Pentecost. John Paul II, Paul VI, the Second Vatican Council, all the things that went before. And that's an important part. And then we have some of the substantive things we're starting to see, where he's laying out programmatically his vision. Part of it is, as he said to the diplomats who are accredited to the Holy See when he met with them, that there will be times when we must speak frankly. And it was a very interesting turn of phrase. You could translate it also as bluntly, but we speak frankly. And that's an indicator that he will be frank when the situation calls for it and calling out certain situations. I think, for example, he had a very clear reference to the situation in China. So it's not a radical departure from Francis, but I think it's a departure in the sense that Leo sees that he must be a voice out there, certainly in the diplomatic realm, and I think we're going to see more of that. And then when it comes time for these appointments, we're seeing that he is already looking at sort of a local vision, classic term in Catholic social teaching, subsidiarity. You go to the most local level. Why?
Right.
Because that's where they know how things work. So he's been promoting from within, so to speak, in different dioceses around the world. And I think that, too, is very interesting.
Yeah. Talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, of course, our VP and editorial director of EWTN News and veteran Catholic journalist and church historian. His brand new book, Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. What I find also very interesting, getting back to the way he came out, the way he was vested, and on the loggia the very first day, and we heard the words Habemus Papam, and the fact that he speaks Latin so not only beautifully but very well, and was singing the Regina Coeli, all these different things that we were talking about when we were, of course, on set in Rome that Sunday, that first full Sunday when he had his first Mass. But I think the imagery, and the tradition he knows something about what this means, because if you look at the research, and you know this, there was a very interesting story I've been talking about a lot that just was published last week on the Free Press News website that said when Catholic became cooler, how Catholic got cool. And one of the points that the people made, these were young converts, they wanted the tradition. They wanted something that they could hold on to. They wanted the imagery, the smells and bells that meant something to them. And then we also, at the same time, they didn't mention Pope Leo in the interviews that were done, but at the same time, we have this Pope who is doing just that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not, again, we have to be clear here. It's not, for example, that we're suddenly going to go back to the Tridentine Mass, or that this is some kind of a rejection of the Second Vatican Council. Quite the opposite. I think what Leo is doing is, by pulling in all of these different threads of traditions, again, with the small t, customs and symbols, you're right, he is sending visual cues, including to young people who are drawn to imagery today. Mm-hmm. During the conclave, I think you and I even joked at one point that there were all of these memes and pictures on X and Instagram, and it showed, for example, the funeral of Pope Francis, or in particular the procession of the cardinals into the Sistine Chapel for the conclave, and all it said was, there's no aesthetic like Catholic aesthetic. Mm. Because we do imagery better than anyone else. And why? Because it isn't an empty set of images, that it isn't simply...
Everything has a meaning and a connection to history.
Exactly. Yeah. That's a really important point, Teresa, because what you see there leads you to something deeper. And Pope Francis had his style of simplicity. And the point he was making was for the Church to not be overly self-referential. Leo is taking not a rejection of that, but he's saying, okay, here are images that also point to something deeper. So it's not self-referential, but it's leading you somewhere. In fact, it's still leading you out. As a good Augustinian, if you have that encounter with the truth, it impels you for the love of God, and the love of God leads you to love of neighbor. So even with the little visual cues, you are still leading people in some way to have an encounter with something spiritually rich, something deeper, that will then help you in your path to have that encounter with the truth. And I think there's deeper meaning to all of this, and that's why it works.
Amen. I can't believe it. Only one segment left with Dr. Bunson. I knew this would go by quickly. So many additional questions I have. The beautiful book is Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. Talking with its author, our very own Dr. Matthew Bunson. And we have one more segment coming up. Stay tuned. Having a great conversation. I knew it would go by quickly. Only one more segment. We'll have to just do it again in the near future. Dr. Matthew Bunson, our Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News, veteran Catholic journalist and church historian, talking about his brand new book, hot off the presses from EWTN and Sophia, Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. Okay, this is, I think, fascinating to me, knowing a lot of priests who, discerning a vocation, and he apparently was playing priest as a child. This was something that was on his heart for a very long time. What did you find out in your research, Matthew, that led him to an order, and in particular the Augustinian order, versus being a diocesan priest?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that he loved playing a priest as a kid. Mass on pretending to say Mass, using an ironing board and Necco wafers. And his two brothers, older than he is, were the congregation. So I joked that it must have been a pretty unruly congregation at times, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. But everyone seemed to know that, this kid is destined for the priesthood. In fact, friends and neighbors even joked, oh, yeah, someday he'll be Pope.
No way. Did they really?
They did, yes. And now, it's a nice thing to say, but it turned out to be absolutely true.
I had not heard that. I heard that they were always saying that he always wanted to be a priest and whatnot, but I did not hear that, he's going to be Pope someday. Wow.
Well,
wow,
like I said, it's a nice thing to say to a kid. But priests were always around in the sense of, it's a different era, so you had more priests. You also, we know that the Augustinian presence in that part of Illinois was high. You had in nearby Michigan a junior seminary that was still open. It eventually closed at some point after he had done his time there. Back in the day, you still had all of those different options. So he was drawn, I think, at some point to the Augustinian tradition, even though he might not necessarily put it in those terms. There was something about the life of the Augustinians that really appealed to him. I think part of it was similar in a way to Pope Francis, who himself wanted to be a missionary in Asia, which is why he always had such a keen interest in that part of the world. I think that young Bob, or Rob as he was called also, loved the idea of being a missionary. He loved the idea of being a priest. What was the key here, and I used the phrase, the ordinariness of his Catholic life growing up, thanks to his parents. They were there every step of the way in nourishing this vocation. I think that's one of the great lessons of the life of Pope Leo XIV, that it is and he's referenced the significance and importance of family life, that within that, the traditional image of the domestic church, within that environment of faith, of being raised in the Catholic faith, of living the faith, of just making it so much a part of your life that it would be unthinkable that you'd walk away from it. Not just that, as important as that is, but then when you begin to see in your child a vocation to the religious life or to the priesthood, they didn't do anything to discourage it. In fact, they encouraged it, that this is what he might actually be being called to. And that, I think, was absolutely crucial. And then when it came time for him to make the decision, okay, where are we going to go? Providentially, you had right nearby, as I was just saying, this Augustinian institution, this junior seminary. And so the timing was perfect, the location was perfect. And really from the beginning, he took so perfectly to the Augustinian tradition. And he's now been in that for 55 years. And you can tell the Augustinian tradition in everything he says, and down even to the little things of how, even though he's Pope now, what did he do? He got in his little car, he got in the car and drove 3 minutes. He can't walk now because of security. Next door to the Vatican, to the Augustinianum, the headquarters of the Augustinians, where he served for more than a decade and had studied as the head of the Augustinians. He went back, he had lunch with them. He went and celebrated a friend's birthday there. So he has, in that great Augustinian tradition, an understanding and abiding appreciation for the importance of friendships, of hospitality. And I think that's going to serve him really well as Pope.
That was my next question in terms of, I love St. Augustine. I mean, I think so many people can identify with him and his, Lord, make me holy, but not yet, quote especially. But how do you think being an Augustinian in terms of the Pope, the role of the, leader of the one holy Catholic and apostolic faith, how will that theology, that thinking, do you think help him in his role as the 267th Pope?
Yeah, I think from a couple of different directions. I mentioned this idea of hospitality, of friendships, of welcoming. And it isn't this hazy idea of just welcoming everyone, which is true. Now, I always go back. I think it's attributed to Cardinal Francis George, again, who made the point of, everyone is welcome, but on Christ's terms, not yours. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we can come at it from two directions. The first, as a dedicated Augustinian, he understands the importance of the search for the truth. That was Augustine's lifelong quest. But when you find the truth, that brings you, of course, to the love of God. Right. And that great phrase from Augustine, late have I loved you.
Loved you. Mm-hmm.
And that means, of course, personal conversion. But when you have that encounter with the truth, when you find that love of God, and you develop a love for God, it impels you to what? To love of neighbor. So that you have to go out. You have to proclaim that love. And you have to live that love. And I think that's something that's going to be emblematic here. But it also is anchored in that love is peace. our hearts are restless, Lord, until they rest in you.
In thee.
It quietum cor nostrum est, donec requiescat in te, as Augustine wrote. So our hearts are restless. And what were the first words that Leo said as Pope? The very first things out of his mouth.
Peace be with you.
Peace be with you. Yep. But it's a peace that you can only find in Christ. But he's even more specific. It is the peace in the risen Christ. So I think peace, finding peace, proclaiming peace, and helping people find peace, those are going to be key elements, the pillar of this pontificate.
Do you think, and I'm sure he is, but in your research and what you know about him now, as much as you know because of all the work you've done in this beautiful book, do you think he realizes that some of this is, this is cool, we have an American Pope, and I just hope that it's not, some of it always is going to be, people will be fascinated for a while, then they'll move on, but I think he has a type of charism that will keep people interested in paying attention to what he has to say. I'm sure he's aware of that, but I think he can do that because of the type of person he seems to be in terms of his outreach.
Yeah, there's always this tendency to say, well, this is just a honeymoon period.
Right.
What is really interesting to me is, I haven't had the impression of like a honeymoon period in which everyone is sort of bedazzled by the things that he does. And I mentioned where he apologized for being late, but that was it's an aside in a way. It's simply him being authentic and having that humor. There have not been any massively grand or performative gestures that would seem, and not that he would do this anyway, not that any pope would do this, where he's intent on sort of seizing the spotlight and making huge points. He has settled in so smoothly in this transition into the papacy that it defies even the use of the term honeymoon period, because what did he do? He just went to work, which is a hallmark also of a great missionary and a member of a religious order. That, okay, this is my new task. This is the task that God has given me. I am a man under obedience. In this case, I'm successor to St. Peter. I'm just getting to work. And so there's this serenity about it, but it's also very workmanlike. And I think that's something that is worth noting, because that itself is going to endure. Now, there are going to be decisions coming that there must be in the near future. Eventually, we're going to have some sort of a resolution of the ongoing confusion or questions surrounding the traditional Latin Mass and how it's the Traditionis Custodes is going to be enforced or not enforced, or how it's going to be handled. That will raise a lot of concern in some quarters, possibly. It might raise agitation in others. How he deals with a number of the crises that the church is facing in terms of a lack of unity. We're already seeing he has this deep impulse toward unity. Why? Because we have to be anchored in Christ. His motto. In Christ we are one. In illo uno unum. So, but those impulses toward unity ultimately will entail decisions that are going to be difficult ones. And then we have the appointments that he has to make. He needs still to pick his successor as the head of the dicastery for bishops. That will give us another data point. So there are a lot of decisions that are coming that will tell us more about his program and his vision for the church.
I do think it's very interesting and telling, and I would love your take on this as we wrap up. We have about 3 minutes left. The media don't seem, they were fascinated for about a week, as the media always are, and you and I and some of our other friends at EWTN was like a revolving door doing all these different interviews with various news outlets, which is great because I'm glad they saw us as experts. But what I find very interesting is the media don't seem as infatuated with him as they did with Francis, and I think it's because that Francis, they thought, was much more their guy in terms of liberalism and what they wanted to see pushed. They just went nuts when Francis, for example, went and paid his own bill. Remember when he paid his own bill right after he got elected and went to the hotel, and they were like, oh, this is so... And they were also enamored with the fact that he moved out of he wouldn't go into the Apostolic Palace, not realizing, and I'm not criticizing the Pope, but you and I both know the expense and the effort that had to be done, right, at the Santa Marta in order to house the Pope as opposed to being in the Apostolic Palace, which isn't, it says palace, but it's not exactly like, the Bellagio Hotel in Vegas. You know what I mean?
That's exactly right. We think of this grand Renaissance palace. Well, certainly the art is fantastic. The architecture is beautiful. But you know better than I, that the plumbing isn't necessarily the greatest.
Yep.
It's not the most ornate in the sense that the actual apostolic quarters, the papal rooms, are fairly austere. Mm-hmm. And there's a simplicity to it that is very deceptive. No, you're right. And I think the way that Pope Leo has settled in so quickly, the media itself sees this as not a rejection of Francis, but, this is like every other pope. So what makes him different and shiny? And I think that's going to be more lasting for him than had he done, like I was just saying, a series of these grand performative gestures.
Right.
And again, that's not in any way a criticism of Francis. That was his style. This is a different pope, and Leo himself is his own man. And this is his style. He's very calm. He's very quiet. He goes about his work in exactly the way he did as the cardinal prefect. I mean, he just settled into that role and had a very low profile, seemingly, certainly publicly, in that role. And yet he was increasingly very well known among the members of the College of Cardinals, among archbishops and bishops around the world, as a very, very competent administrator, who knew what he was doing, but also who knew how to listen.
Yeah, and I think what you said about him just seeming so comfortable in the role, watching the different news feeds and whatnot, it's like, there's our new pope. And it didn't seem like, we have to adjust, because he just fit right in. Matthew, great discussion. We'll have you back on to talk more about your book, Pope Leo XIV, The Portrait of the First American Pope. Where can we get the book?
You can find it at Religious Catalog at EWTN.com and also at Amazon.com.
Great. Dr. Matthew Bunson, Pope Leo XIV, Portrait of the First American Pope. We'll be right back. Do hope you're having a great Friday morning, June 27, 2025, and I hope you enjoyed the re-airing of the special interview we did with my dear friend, Matthew Bunson. And by the way, just a reminder, Matthew and I are doing, and I mentioned this earlier this week, but we are doing a pilgrimage together next year, next fall, La Dolce Fide, which is a series of pilgrimages that Deacon Dom and I have been doing, and each year we kind of switch it up a bit and do different themes. Well, in 2026, we are doing In the Footprints of the Pope, so it's Dr. Bunson and I, and we are going to be leading people to places such as Viterbo, right, and going up to Arezzo, which is also very important, spending time in Orvieto, where the Pope there, of course, confirming and researching the Eucharistic miracle, Corpus Christi. We're also going to be going to the Papal Palace down in Castel Gandolfo, which is, of course, just lovely, and having a wonderful reception and dinner there. We're also going to be going to some other places related to the Pope. So if you'd like to join us, you can simply email me through my website, teresatomio.com, and we could put you on a waiting list. You can also call the folks at Corporate Travel Service or go to their website at ctscentral.net. Matthew will be on, and we'll be talking about it in more detail, but I do know that this is going to sell out fairly quickly, and we hope you can join us next fall. La Dolce Fide with T and Matthew Bunson, In the Footprints of the Popes. Okay, coming up in the next hour of the program, you don't want to miss part 2 of my interview with Kelly Solomon, Newman Guide News, where we're looking at the not-so-Catholic colleges and what they're trying to sell our students. And this is a big warning for moms and dads. I think you'll really appreciate the second part of this interview. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Catholic Connection with Teresa Tomeo, keeping you connected to your faith and your world. Teresa tackles the issues of faith and culture, the pro-life message, and media awareness. And now, here's Teresa Tomeo.
And it's a Friday, hour number 2 of Catholic Connection here on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Networks, right? The EWTN Extra channel. We're happy you're listening. Maybe you're listening on the app as well. Either way, we're glad you're here. We are going to jump right into part 2 of the interview that we began in the first hour of the program with Dr. Nathanael Blake. His latest book, his new book, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. I don't think you want to miss this. And again, I encourage you to get a copy of the book, Victims of the Revolution. It means a lot in terms of having so much information at our hands, especially the truth of who we are, made in the image and likeness of God. God's plan is always the best plan for everything, including the way we treat our bodies. And Dr. Nathanael Blake in this book dives into that deeply. So here is part 2 of the interview. Nathanael Blake is our guest this morning, author of a new book from Ignatius Press, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. So, Nathanael, here we are in Pride Month, and there's so much going on, and we live in an over-sexualized culture, and it just seems to get a lot worse during this month where the emphasis is all on accepting these lifestyles, which you know from your own research, and we understand that not only hurts our souls, but it hurts us physically in so many ways in terms of this idea that who we are doesn't matter. We can be whatever we want to be and do whatever we want with whom. So let's talk about this Pride Month. How do we handle this? Because we want to be loving to people, but we also need to stand for the truth because it's better and best for all of us, and it's God's plan, not our plan. So any advice on thoughts as we're moving through the next couple of weeks?
It's a hard topic, and some people are very dug in. They don't want to listen, and you're going to have some people who will simply reject the truth, and you can just pray for them. But there are a few points we can make to the broader culture and to those who are wondering about this. A lot of Christians feel very defensive. So a few things. One is that there is no gay gene. We've spent many years presuming that homosexuality was absolutely innate and immutable, and it was then suggested that wanting to be transgender, thinking you could avoid both opposite sex, was the same way. And there's simply no proof of that. A major study a few years back in Nature showed that no, there is no there's no gay gene. And that's just sort of quietly explained. In fact, we've also had a lot of people, including New York Times columnists like Lydia Palgreen, admitting that actually sexuality is much more fluid. They're not born this way. So that's one point we can make, and that's not necessarily to people struggling with this. They might find that difficult, but it's an important one to make to the culture. But I think what we can say is God designed us, as you said, for male and female to come together in a union that unites the two halves of the human race and then provides for the next generation of the human race. That is something that is both foundational in this life. It is also something that is the source of some of our highest joys in this life. And finally, it's something that points us towards our eschatological fulfillment in Christ, the union of Christ and the church represented as a marriage. The church is the bride of Christ. So Christianity says this is important from the very foundational biological level up to our highest fulfillment in union with God. We are meant to rejoice in being male and female, and what we see in the sexual revolution is a constant rejection of this. So even among heterosexual, those who want to be with the opposite sex, we see a violation of how this is supposed to be. When we see hookup culture, casual sex, and so on, that says, no, instead of being fruitful, instead of being committed, sexual relationships can be temporary. And that particularly hurts women because the nature of sex and of human reproduction is asymmetric. Women are more vulnerable. Women and children are the ones who bear the brunt of a culture that says immediate sexual pleasure over commitment. And then from same-sex attraction and homosexuality to transgenderism, it all builds off of this rejection of ourselves and our bodies, and of that as normative. It says that our bodies are meaningless except for what we want from them. It's a subjective matter. It's not something that is in any way normative for how we should live. But that just leads to endless chasing of a sexual dragon, the sexual high that leaves us empty.
So I was telling you during the break that one of my very astute listeners, Terry, sent me this email that copied me and several other folks on this. And this is what you'll find on AI, one of the explanations of sex in terms of whether you're male or female. And he's saying, no wonder so many people are confused. Yes, and this is what AI says. Sex is typically assigned at birth based on observable physical characteristics, primarily external body parts, and recorded on birth certificates. This assigned sex is often referred to as assigned sex at birth or biological sex. While these terms are commonly used, it's important to understand that assigned sex at birth does not always align with a person's gender identity or internal sense of self. Are you kidding me? No, this is what is on AI when it talks about when a child is born and their sex, whether they're male or female.
Yeah, it's just a denial that our bodies have any meaning. Instead of accepting, right, for a movement that talks so much about accepting who we are, what they mean by that is not accept yourself physically for who you are, male or female. It's your subjective sense of self, your subjective desires are who you are. And that's actually a very dehumanizing perspective, that you are simply what you want. You are simply how and who you want to have sex. But that's dehumanizing. That's not a noble vision or an accepting vision of what it means to be human. That is a vision that degrades us down to the level of any other animal.
Talking with Nathanael Blake, Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurts Us All. Have you heard of, there's a particular psychologist, I believe she was, or a psychiatrist, I'm not sure, but I've interviewed her many times, and she's amazing, Miriam Grossman. And
yes,
she's someone who's not even coming at this, as you know, from a Catholic or a religious perspective. And she released a book last year called Lost in Transnation, which I interviewed her on as well. And she was, working at a college, and she was counseling these young girls, and these girls were coming in. And I'm telling this to our listeners, I'm sure you know the story. And she could not understand why so many of these bright, wonderful girls were so depressed. And then she started to notice a connection that they were involved. And this was before her first book came out, which was many years ago. She found out that they had the hookup culture, that they were connected through the hookup culture in the sense of that they were all exhibiting that. Was she would say, well, how do you spend your time? And they would talk about their personal life. And so many of them had been with so many different partners over a short period of time. And that was the big similarity between all these girls that she was trying to counsel. And then she started to look into it, and she was stunned at how the over-sexualized culture was impacting these young women. And again, she was coming at this not, as you know, she's not even coming at it from a religious perspective.
Well, I think what we're seeing there is the truth played out in an unfortunate way in these lives, which is that we are made not for pleasure, not short-term pleasure, but for love. And love requires relationship. And people who pursue short-term pleasure end up often with neither pleasure nor love, whereas those who pursue love first are more likely to have love and to find pleasure as well.
So what do we do with all this incredible information and research? I know you said you want deacons and ministers and priests because they're on the front lines, and that's so true. What can we, the average lay Catholic, do with this when we have your book?
Well, hopefully read it. But
first and foremost, read it. Yeah.
But I think what we see is people interacting in the workplace, in schools, raising their families, and so on. And I think we need more confidence that ours is, in fact, a better way of life, that we're not the scolds, the killjoys, the bigots that a sexualized culture says we are. But no, we're the ones trying to protect and promote and nourish genuine human well-being, rooted in our nature in this world, what we are meant for in this life, in marriage and family. Again, most of us called to those vocations. And that then directs us ultimately towards our fulfillment in the life that is to come, in the union of Christ and His church.
How important is it, and I totally do this a lot because I think it's easier to reach someone if you're not coming at it, especially if they're not quite there yet and understanding church teaching or even being open to it. How important is it to cite non-Catholic sources, do you think, when you're in a discussion with someone about this?
I think it helps. I think it really does help if you can lead with, well, let's talk about what this person is, who's a liberal feminist is saying in the New York Times, acknowledging that the hookup culture and porn culture have not served women. It's not making women happy. I think that helps because they're open to diagnosing the problem, especially from a source that they might trust. And then once they start to acknowledge that, oh, this is the problem in our culture, in my life perhaps, then these people care about me, they're trying to help me avoid this problem, then I think there's more openness. And it's a challenge, but I do think that Christians have an opportunity in a way that I haven't seen maybe 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate, where it was presumed that this would make people happy. I think a lot of people are unhappy, and when people are unhappy, they start to look for answers elsewhere. And Christianity can provide those answers to people for how to live.
And I think sometimes, too, asking questions, well, have you done any research on whether this kind of a lifestyle or this particular way of living and how happy people are? Because even the Surgeon General from the previous administration had talked about how miserable we are on so many levels, whether it's young people, whether it's parents, whether it's individuals, and how this whole idea of being so into yourself has caused us just in general so many promises and so many problems.
Yeah, he talked about a loneliness epidemic, and he's right. And you know what's really created that loneliness epidemic is a culture that degrades commitment, in which adult relationships are disposable, dissolvable, and of course that means parent-child relationships are also disposable and dissolvable.
So do you think now people are more open to hearing it because people seem to be expressing their faith a little bit more frequently? I mean, do you feel this is a good time for us to champion the teachings?
I think so. We always need to speak the truth in and out of season, but I do think there is a moment here where trust in the authorities that proclaimed the sexual revolution is down. And trust in all authorities largely is down. So it is a time to say we actually have a better way of life, and not just to proclaim it, but to model it. I think one of the best witnesses to Christian faith and the truth of Christian teaching is going to be Christians who are happy, Christians who are not, if the contrast is striking increasingly, whether it's how they raise their children with regard to technology or just commitment, being with someone for decades and loving them more, growing together. That is a powerful witness because our culture has so lost that outside of the church.
And I think just being there, being joyful and being there for someone and maybe finding out where they are at in terms of why they feel a particular way. A lot of times, though, they don't really know. They haven't really given it a lot of thought, and I'm sure you found this, where they just kind of accept it because that's what they think everybody believes or everybody is supposed to believe, and they don't want to be the odd man or woman out.
Yes, there are people who just participate in things that are making them unhappy, and they know they're unhappy, but they don't even know that there's a better way of life. This is something that came across in some of these stories I read, where there's a lack of awareness for people who are immersed in these cultures, that there is even the possibility that you might, for young women in particular, that there might be young men out there who would love and commit to them rather than just seeking temporary hookups or at most a non-committed, long-term, medium-term relationship where you're together, but there's absolutely no commitment. You'll combine your bodies, but you certainly won't combine your bank account.
Right. I remember a friend of mine, a moral theologian, was giving a talk at a college, and a young woman came up to her afterwards, and she said, "Nobody ever told me. You're the first person who told me I didn't have to sleep with every single man I date on the first date." How sad is that? Book is so needed. Thank you, Nathanael. Appreciate it. Dr. Nathanael Blake. The book is Victims of the Revolution, How Sexual Liberation Hurt Us All, published by Ignatius Press. We'll be right back. Hope you're having a beautiful June, and specifically a beautiful Monday in June. It's June 9th, 2025. You're listening to the second hour of EWTN's Catholic Connection with yours truly, TT on CC, Teresa Tomeo on Catholic Connection. EWTN Radio Extra, and of course our app at EWTN.com. You can find us there and all kinds of other great programming, both radio, TV, and of course online, including once Dr. Marlon De La Torre, our guest who was in the first hour with us, finishes taping. That will be available to you as well, and I highly encourage you to watch his programs with Jim and Joy Pinto, At Home with Jim and Joy, and also Bookmark with our very own Doug Keck. Okay, so my friend Marcy sent me this op-ed in the New York Post, and I thought it was very, very well done in terms of looking at just how far things have gotten in terms of what some companies have had to put up with or felt pressured in some way, shape, or form to bow to the powers that be on the left when it comes to different agendas, especially the LGBTQ agenda during so-called Pride Month. So I'm going to share a little bit of this with you, and then I'm going to comment on it as we go through it. And you can find this on the New York Post, which is nypost.com. And it was, speaking of Post, it was posted, actually published on Saturday, and the writer is Chadwick Moore. So I'm just putting this out there. Why there's no shame in corporate America boycotting LGBT Pride Month. makes some very, very good points here. Private companies, he says, can do whatever they want, leftists once said, in defense of companies such as Facebook banning conservative speech. But now the tables have turned, and LGBTQ activists have found themselves in a state between panicked and sulky, as their fair-weather friends in corporate America are pulling sponsorships of Pride celebrations this month. As a result, Pride events, he says, across the country are facing budget shortfalls, and activists are blaming everyone but themselves. At least 14 companies, this is huge, 14 companies, including Pepsi, MasterCard, Nissan, Garnier, and others, have dropped or greatly scaled back their financial contributions to annual Pride events nationwide. Anheuser-Busch, makers of Bud Light, also backtrack on Pride sponsorship, and for good reason. The company lost an estimated $395 million after its botched partnership with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney, which led to a nationwide boycott back in 2023. Ever since, and this is true, and think about that, that was over 2 years ago. Ever since then, Bud Light has struggled to reposition itself as the good old boys. God and guns, beverage to lukewarm reception. So they're still trying to get that reputation back, and it's not working. Now, he also points out that the financial numbers are grim. Heritage of Pride organizers of New York City's festivities, by far the largest in the nation, facing a $750,000 shortfall this year after nearly a quarter of corporation donations dried up. This followed years of operating at a loss, and in 2022, the group was some $2.7, almost $3 million in the hole, and another $1.2 million the following year. In California, longtime corporate donors ran for the hills when San Francisco Pride Executive Director Suzanne Ford reached out begging for money. Twin Cities Pride has seen longtime corporate sponsorship in Minnesota shift into retreat mode, and now the group is scrambling to meet a $200,000 goal. Organizers in Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, and St. Louis have all reported being ghosted by big companies they once relied upon. All of this, the writer says, is occurring at a time when a dozen companies have withdrawn participation from the Human Rights Campaign, Corporate Equity Index, a shakedown scheme used by LGBT nonprofit groups to enforce woke capitalism. Now, for these activists, the reason for all of this is simple. It's simply conservatives and Trump's fault, the article says. There's a lot of fear of repercussions for aligning with our festival, says Wes Shaver, president of Milwaukee Pride. He spoke to the New York Times, joining others who believe companies fear they may be penalized by the White House if they donate to Pride events, citing the administration's efforts to curtail DEI initiatives. When asked about this, the White House didn't respond to multiple requests for comment from the Post. What's equally likely is that everyone, well, and this is a really good point. It's like enough already. Everybody is just fatigued by all of this. The writer describes a collective eye roll at the oversaturation of LGBT themes in culture, combined with all the negative connotations now associated with Pride. It was once considered a niche or a niche event, but it's devolved into a mainstream month-long, and this is very true, orgy of far leftism that looks more like a tent revival beckoning an impending open borders transgender race war. Transgender insanity has swallowed the entire movement, and we're going to be talking about this up next with our guest in just a few minutes, about all the efforts that are taking place around the country trying to protect different groups of people from this agenda. Transgender insanity has swallowed the entire movement, and in doing so repelled middle-of-the-road Americans. And this is what I just don't understand, because if you look at the surveys, if you look at the voting, if you look at the research, its idea of fatigue is very real. And even among people who may not agree with us on other issues, they really do agree when it comes to their children not being pressured, or companies not being pressured, or products not being forced on us, or agendas not being forced on us. I mean, the response from Anheuser-Busch using this transgender influencer, this man who dressed up as a woman, selling Bud Light, as we read earlier, and as I read earlier to you, they're still paying the price for that. And yet they're still trying to go in many ways down this same path. The writer says it's exhausting. And what company in its right mind wants to be tied to all that? While activists say companies are afraid of Trump, see, I just don't think that's true. The same could have been true about Biden. Businesses certainly felt the Democratic gun in their back to start coughing up their woke money during his term. Overall, the corporate retreat from pride is a good thing for everyone, and it ought to continue. The grotesque parade of political and corporate pandering that's defined so-called pride over the last 20 years is embarrassing, as any honest, even gay person would admit. After all, who wants their sex life validated by junk food companies and other questionable companies? It's also alienated plenty of old-timers. The cold corporations are more important to the rotating heritage of pride than the actual surviving Stonewall veterans. Plenty are still alive and kicking, former New York City Pride Grand Marshal William Henderson of the Stonewall Veterans Association, who took part in the original Stonewall Rebellion, told the New York Post. Corporate America, however, is a skittish place, and only the most destructive HR managers want business butting in on the culture wars. Now, this last point is another excellent point, and I think it's something that those on the left need to realize. They need to look in the mirror and stop with this heavy pushing of agendas, especially agendas that most Americans disagree with. This is not a 50-50, 60-40 situation. This is usually 90-10, 80-20. The vast majority of people, if you look at the surveys, and this goes back right before the election, even through now, people have had it. If you go back all the way to 2023 with the whole Anheuser-Busch thing, rather than blaming Republicans for a long-deserved pushback against rainbow totalitarianism, the activists ought to do a better job of policing themselves, embarking on a little soul-searching as to how they became so toxic, and maybe even re-examine their unbridled love of money. I think this is an excellent op-ed that makes a lot of points that we're all, I think, thinking about. We've had enough. Now we pray for those who disagree with us on this issue, and this is the month of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and we put them in our Lord's hands, but at the same time, we have a right to support companies that are supporting the things in which we believe as well. And the vast majority of Americans do not agree with this agenda. So it's time to rethink some things. Good article. Why there's no shame in corporate America boycotting LGBT Pride Month. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Catholic Connection. Always great to catch up with Kelly Salmon from the Cardinal Newman Society for our Newman Guide News. So, Kelly, I really appreciate this podcast, well, your podcast in general that you do at the Newman Center. But this particular discussion with this young woman, how brave is she and was she to really stand up against this culture that was not anything that she expected when she thought she was going to a Catholic school. So this is what we're calling part 2 of our interview with Emily. So first of all, set this up for us, then we'll play a short clip, about 35 seconds, to kind of give people a flavor of what we're discussing. But set this interview up and this podcast up for us, if you will, and good to have you on the program again.
Sounds good. Thanks, Teresa. Great to be back on with you and talking about the second section of this podcast interview we did with Emily Torres. She's a recent graduate of a Catholic college, and she's also a recent convert to the Catholic faith. And she went off to college hoping to find some like-minded Catholic friends to help build her up in her faith. And unfortunately, what she encountered at a Catholic college was scandal and confusion. And Teresa, this is an important reminder for Catholic families to do their due diligence as they navigate the college search and seek out a truly faithful Catholic college.
Yeah, that's so true. Right now, because it's that time of year when, some kids are preparing to head off to school, other kids are maybe going to an orientation. This is a particular, I think, a very timely topic for right now, is it not?
I think it's very important right now. A lot of high school sophomores and juniors are attending summer programs this summer at Newman Guide recommended colleges. They're making campus visits to lots of places, and Catholic families need to be aware of the state of education today, and that's what the Cardinal Newman Society has been doing for 30 years. We were founded after our president, Patrick Riley, experienced scandal at a Catholic college he attended and started alerting families to what was happening at his college and at other Catholic colleges. And I think that was really one of the first times that people started becoming aware of what's going on these campuses. Unfortunately, many of our Catholic colleges, even as these things are pointed out, they haven't made changes, and that's why we recommend faithful Catholic colleges in the Newman Guide, and we continue to highlight what's going on so that Catholic families can know and know the Newman Guide difference.
I mean, it can be pretty crazy out there, as we're going to hear in some of the clips we're going to be playing from Emily. How do you think it got to this point, Kelly, in your experience? What do you think happened?
Yes, so much secularization. I think so much chasing after secular prestige, secular rankings, secular research initiatives, instead of remaining rooted in what Catholic education is all about. Pope John Paul II released Ex Corde Ecclesiae in 1990 to express what a Catholic university should be all about. It should be about the integration of faith and reason, integrally forming students, seeking out truth, and having faithful Catholic professors teaching in these places.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so set up the first clip. It's a short one, but it packs a powerful punch. It's about 35 seconds. So what's she going to explain to us in this particular soundbite?
Yes, so in this first soundbite, you'll get a glimpse of how even Catholic beliefs that Emily was trying to share at a Catholic college, she faced so much heat for simply expressing truths of the faith on her campus. And she sadly says, after graduation, she has no friends that she's kept in touch with after attending this Catholic university. And this clip will give you a little glimpse into why that's the case.
All right. Well, here we go. We're going to roll this first clip. It's of Emily Torres, and she's a student, a recent graduate of I'm doing the air quotes here if you could see me, Catholic college, and some of what she encountered, she explains here.
That was the disheartening part. Like I said, I wanted to go to a Catholic college to find a group of like-minded individuals for community. And even when I'm in these circles that you would think I would find that, I just didn't. And I even found people that were hostile towards me because of me preaching just what the Catholic Church already teaches. And that reminded me too of getting comments from people about the pro-life club, this shouldn't be allowed on campus. And it's this is a Catholic school. What do you mean this shouldn't be allowed on campus?
Right.
You know what I mean? There's just this huge disconnect happening at this school.
Shouldn't be allowed on campus. That is just, you hear that, you're like, oh, you can't make it up, Kelly, right?
She's holding this pro-life tabling and trying to disseminate research on why we believe life begins at conception, why all life should be valued. And she's sort of the outcast on her campus, by standing for pro-life values. And I think about at Newman Guide colleges where pro-life leaders are being formed, where the truths of our faith are being shared in pro-life conferences, where the pro-life message is being incorporated across the curriculum, where these colleges are going to great lengths to support the pro-life message. I know, Teresa, you and I have talked a little bit about some of these really amazing programs that Newman Guide colleges have to build up pro-life leaders, and also to support women who find themselves with an unplanned pregnancy. Belmont Abbey College in Belmont, North Carolina, and University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota have incredible programs to support pregnant college students and help provide for them and support them so that they can finish their degree and have their baby and provide a joyful environment for them.
Now, does the university of which we're speaking, this particular university in the Midwest, did they know that she was doing this interview? Have they had any response? Did you reach out to them, or has there been any discussion?
We haven't heard from them. I know that she reached out to the administration so many times while she was a student on campus, expressing her concerns about the drag show on campus, expressing her concern that her posters about pro-life events were not being kept up on the walls on campus, expressing her concerns about the theology department on campus. And overall, she didn't hear a lot back from the university. What she told us is she really relied on friends she made online as she was becoming Catholic in high school. She found some online Catholic forums of people who really helped her to pursue the truth and to seek out the truth of the Catholic faith. And she relied on these online communities throughout college to help her stay Catholic and to understand what the church really teaches about different issues.
It's you feel so badly for her and also for other students who are in a similar situation, maybe even Catholic students who really believed in their faith and what that must have been like, even though she had a hard time finding them because there probably weren't that many on the campus. But I do believe that God is using this in her it really, I get the sense that it really strengthened her faith. Don't you agree with that, Kelly?
Yes. She said, I felt like there was one way or another to go. I could either lose my faith or this was going to ignite my faith. And thanks to the grace of God, I think her faith really grew, and she's going on to work for Catholic Answers now. And what that great preparation she had of encountering really troubling issues and doing the research and doing the work to learn what the church teaches. I think she'll be a wonderful blessing to Catholic Answers, and really how this background did prepare her in a lot of ways for that.
Yeah, I think it's amazing the way God is using her. I mean, she's already been in that situation where she's had to defend the faith, explain it, and defend it in a Catholic setting to people that were above her. So this is really going to give her, the guts that she needs to go out there, especially working for a fine organization like Catholic Answers to do more apologetics. More with Kelly Solomon and the story of Emily Torres, who spoke up for her faith, even though she was being attacked for it at a Catholic university in the Midwest. We'll have a few other clips from this fantastic podcast that this young woman did with the Cardinal Newman Society. We'll be right back. Every week we have the chance to sit down with Kelly Solomon from the Cardinal Newman Society for our Newman Guide News, and we are continuing our discussion as we did it recently. This is part 2 with Emily Torres, the podcast with Emily Torres, a young woman who now is working for Catholic Answers, or is going to be working for Catholic Answers, a recent graduate of a Midwest university, and we'll name the university as well if you're wondering in a second, because she did mention it in the podcast. But this young woman, a convert to the faith, goes to a Catholic college thinking, hey, this is going to be great. Everybody in the pool, we're all going to be happy. We're going to be learning more and growing in our faith. And instead, she finds herself an apologist with people who were supposedly in the church and teaching the faith. So, Kelly, let's set up this next clip, which is pretty scary, about theology classes that she attended at this particular school, if you would. It's about, I think this one is about 38 seconds long. So tell us about this soundbite that we're going to hear.
Yes. So Emily Torres encountered a lot of sad issues on her Catholic campus, everything from drag shows to major pushback against pro-life efforts to now her theology classes. And, Emily had great things to say about the philosophy department at her college, but unfortunately, although she would have loved to take more theology classes, she was not hearing good things about them from some of the Catholic students she had met, and that there was major issues going on in these theology classes. And again, I think of the stark contrast at Newman Guide recommending in colleges, where students take several courses in authentic Catholic theology, and theologians have the mandatum from their bishop in which they pledge to teach according to church teaching. So here's Emily and her experience with the theology classes at her Catholic college.
Yeah, wait till you hear this,
I couldn't
folks.
find a single theology teacher. Maybe one that I had heard good reviews about from my other friends that were, faithful. So two things I want to share about that. So I had heard from friends who were getting degrees in theology. so much blasphemy happening in their theology classes. So like, for example, some of the teachers wanted you to refer to God by she, her pronouns, even though God has revealed his pronouns as he, him. So it's so stupid. Teachers teaching that when Jesus told Lazarus to come out of the cave, that was a coming out of his sexuality.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know what to say.
It's hard to put into words a response to that, right, Teresa?
I don't know if I actually heard that one yet. I mean, I've heard so many things in my, 24 plus years on the air in Catholic media, but that's a new one. So that was a coming out moment. That's what that was about, apparently. Okay.
Yeah. And
Oh my
students,
goodness.
I think we've alerted families a lot that on secular campuses, you need to be prepared to defend your faith, to stand up for what you believe in. But at Catholic colleges as well, this one is not the only Catholic college that we've unfortunately reported on the scandals taking place for so many years, right? There's a whole host of Catholic colleges, unfortunately, that have strayed from their faith, and that students are being taught things in the classroom that go against what the church teaches.
Do you think, Kelly, that parents are becoming more aware? I told you the conversation in the last segment we did on Emily's wonderful podcast, Her Powerful Witness, the conversation I had with a gentleman who he sent his daughter to this same school, and we could say the name of the university, it's Loyola, and he was very upset because he said in one semester, he said all the money he spent on Catholic education, 8 years of Catholic school, 4 years of Catholic high school, and now she was in this school for one semester, and he said she's already lost her faith. Now she's pro-abortion. Now she was espousing some of the very things that Emily was talking about that she heard from her professors. I mean, but do you think parents are becoming more aware of this problem?
Yes, I do think they're becoming more aware. Here at the Cardinal Newman Society, we see huge growth in our web traffic, huge growth in our Newman Guide College Fair, huge growth in the number of high school students signing up for our Recruit Me program and our scholarship contest. We almost doubled our numbers on everything from last year to this year. So
Wow.
I think that, as college becomes, less students are going to college. There are less college-age students now this fall for the first time because of the demographic cliff that, all the media has been talking about. I think that the Newman Guide is becoming even more attractive because it's making families be able to identify something of that is the real advantage of going and investing 4 years, because you're getting a true Catholic education and formation. You're developing as a person. You're learning how to think critically. You're learning the integration of all these subjects, right? It's becoming such a stark contrast, I think, to what is offered at so many other colleges these days.
Yeah. What kind of advice would the Cardinal Newman Society give, though? Because I think this is an important question to ask. Emily, I think, is unique, very strong. Mm-hmm. Obviously, she really loves the Catholic Church, and she studied her way in, and she was determined, as you said, okay, I can go either way. I can either really buckle up and learn my faith here and defend it, or I can, God forbid, lose my faith. But not every young person is going to be able to be an Emily. And if not, this is just my suggestion. As a parent, I would say, okay, it's time to move on and to find another how about a real Catholic university?
Yes, Teresa, I agree with you. I think Emily is definitely an exception, that she was incredibly strong in her faith as a convert because she had thought it out herself and had learned the truth and kept digging for the truth. But I think she's really the exception among 18-year-olds heading off to college. So many of them are going to be influenced so strongly by peer pressure, especially on college campuses. And so where can you go and find a really wholesome Catholic community where you're going to have a group of friends to go to daily Mass with, to frequent the sacraments, to have wholesome fun and activities? That's what you'll find at a Newman Guide College. And God bless Emily, and so glad she was able to make it through. But she really describes her college experience as surviving it,
Right.
And I think college can be so much more. It can be a place where you thrive and where you're prepared for your career and your vocation.
Yeah, on the one hand, we're so proud of her and so grateful that she challenged those at this university. On the other hand, how sad, because I went to a secular school, but I really enjoyed my college years. I was more into my career than I was in my faith at the time, but it was a very positive experience for me. It wasn't negative. And to be able to enjoy it as opposed to going in there, knowing you're going to have to fight every single day. It's an entirely different experience.
Right. And that how much good can 4 more years of formation do to prepare you for our society today? You know, that Emily's doing the work on her own to continue learning her faith and study and read. But Newman Guide colleges are propelling students forward by actually providing them with that kind of education.
I'm glad to hear your numbers are more than doubling in terms of people reaching out. That's fabulous, which means parents are becoming more aware. We're talking with, as we do every week, with Kelly Solomon from the Cardinal Newman Society. They're a really cool website, tons of info, cardinalnewmansociety.org, cardinalnewmansociety.org. Okay, continuing with some clips from this really interesting podcast with Emily Torres. We have a 2-minute clip, and what will we hear from Emily in this clip?
Teresa, I believe this clip is about her connecting with some friends that are still at the college and about how a lavender mass was recently hosted on campus.
Oh my goodness. Okay, here we go. Let's hear it.
I reconnected with a friend who's still there, unfortunately, and
still at Chicago Loyola.
Yes.
Okay.
And she told me about the recent events that have been happening there. One of the events that was just hosted on April 11th this year was this LGBTQ plus CLC. So CLC is Christian Living Community. There's an LGBTQ plus themed one. They had what's called a lavender mass. I don't know what the lavender relevance is, but this is like an LGBTQ mass, basically. That was the theme. And so on the flyer, it says a Catholic mass celebration for all led by the LGBTQ plus community. And they had this in not the main chapel on campus, but we have 2 smaller ones. And so they had it in one of the smaller ones. And according to my friend, they put pride flags in the pews for mass. And they also attempted to put pride flags in the flowers on the altar during mass. And thankfully, one of the sacristans that was helping, she told them, no, you can't do that. You cannot have anything else on the altar. You need to take those out. So they took the pride flags out, thankfully. Also recently, April 13th, they've just been very hot on their April events, apparently. Catholics for Choice came to visit the SRJ Club. So that's the Free Condom Friday group, which is not an official organization, but I guess, again, they are kind of affiliated with our school. They had a pro-choice Catholicism 101 workshop. And on the little flyer, they have an image. The center image is a large image of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And on the side of it, it says, Mary had a choice. You should too.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah, these things just break my heart. And they break my heart for the young people that are exposed to them. And I'll bet you that most Catholic parents don't know this kind of thing is happening.
I've heard that quote. They use it at Christmas time too. Kelly, Mary had a choice, and you should too. It's like, dear God have mercy on their souls.
Blessed Mother, intercede for us.
Please, it's just heartbreaking, and this is on a Catholic campus. Now, did anyone respond to anything? I mean, because she was, really, petitioning the school and talking to people about it. What kind of response did she get from leadership?
Yeah, a lot of times she didn't get a lot of response. Some of these issues come from the fact that some of these groups aren't officially affiliated with the college, right? They'll be unofficial student groups.
Yeah, but they still let them on the campus, and they didn't stop them.
Right. And, they find ways around things like handing out Free Condom Friday across the sidewalk from the campus and things like that.
Free Condom Friday. Oh my gosh.
Right in time with the noon mass. Apparently, it's on campus. Is right when she would hear the yells about
wonderful.
Free Condom Friday going on. And I think it's just more than anything, it speaks to the culture and it speaks to the student community of what kind of environment you're going to be putting your child into, and that's why I'm so grateful that Emily is shedding a light on some of the things that happened during her years there.
I would love to interview her, too. I mean, we have to keep in touch with her because she is amazing. What a strong young woman, and she's going to already is doing great things in the church. All right, so first of all, we're so grateful that you are there and that we can expose this because this is super important that parents are hearing this from the mouth of a young woman who was a new Catholic and was just all gung-ho to go to a Catholic university and ends up having to defend her faith in an atmosphere where she thought her faith would flourish. But in a way, it did flourish in a big way because she became even more dedicated to the truth and the beauty of it. But the fact that she had the knowledge to understand what was going on and to challenge those, professors is so important. Wow. Yeah. Gosh, I'm so grateful for this, Kelly. Great job on bringing this to us. So what's next? What's coming up? What are you guys working on for the summer?
Awesome. Well, right now we're working on our next magazine will be coming out next month. Teresa will be talking about the demographic cliff and how Newman Guide colleges are responding and how they're working more closely with the now K-12 schools we're recommending in the Newman Guide to build up that lifelong Catholic education and the Newman Guide continuum that now goes from kindergarten all the way through graduate programs.
Well, what you guys do is so important, and we're so grateful that you can join us every week to talk about this. Of course, this was our edition of the Newman Guide News with our good friend Kelly Solomon from the Cardinal Newman Society. Check out their great website. Check out the podcast, all the information that's available, and especially the Newman Guide. You can find a link to it on their homepage. All you need to do is go to cardinalnewmansociety.org. Again, that's cardinalnewmansociety.org. We'll be right back. Let you know what's coming up on the next Catholic Connection. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Teresa.
Pretty amazing stuff. God bless this young woman. Hey, don't forget to check out all the great work on the Newman Society website, cardinalnewmansociety.org, and they even have their podcasts up there as well, so you can go back and actually listen to the entire podcast with the young woman who just, wow, talk about strength. Emily is her name, I believe. Yes, let me see. I'm looking this up right now. And as you heard, she even protested a drag show at a Catholic college. I mean, imagine having to face that as a student. You're going, you're all excited, and you end up, in constant defense mode. But again, as we mentioned, it really strengthened her faith to the point where she's now working for the top apologetic organization. Of course, that airs a show every day here on EWTN Radio known as Catholic Answers. Again, you can check out the great work of the Cardinal Newman Society at cardinalnewmansociety.org. Wishing you a beautiful and a peaceful weekend. And my goodness, hope that the month of June was good for you and that you're looking forward to next week. Many people will be taking a break and enjoying some summertime vacations, I'm sure, because we're heading into the July 4th time of year, celebrating our nation's, of course, history and the birth of our nation and all that good stuff. So make sure you get out there and enjoy it, but take us with you. You can find us, of course, always here, the second hour on EWTN Radio Extra, also on the app. But don't forget always to check us out at EWTN.com for all the information. And you have a blessed weekend, and we'll touch base soon next week.